The Whittaker family sits at the center of a storm that none of them asked for. A storm built from curiosity, influence, money, and the consequences of outsiders stepping into a world they did not understand. They became known as America's most inbred family, a label that was never created by them, but widely spread through headlines written far away from the small dirt road in Odd, West Virginia. The latest publicity from the Daily Mail claims to reveal the truth about family members being taken into state care. Yet, the real question is not who wrote what. The question is whether the Whittakers are being protected, exploited, or simply abandoned by a system that reacts only when cameras force it to look. The Daily Mail frames the story with urgency and shock. 3 adult members removed from the home, details described through troubling photos and descriptions of rotting structures, clutter, and insects crawling across surfaces. Viewers are reminded of the family's history, their origins traced through cousins who married cousins, a lineage turned into a global talking point. But newspaper drama doesn't explain why the family was left alone for generations, why poverty was neglected, or why suddenly the intervention arrived only after their faces became content. It's not the inbreeding that created the condition the Whittakers are in today. Poverty did. Isolation did. Lack of mental health support did. But when society looks at them, it does not see a system failure. It sees spectacle. And that is where content creators enter the story. The first creator who put the Whittakers on the world stage was Mark Lyda, through his soft white underbelly documentary. Mark did not create the family situation. He revealed it. His videos were raw, visual, and uncomfortable. They sparked empathy from many and disgust from others. They also drew millions of views, a currency of its own. Donations began pouring in from strangers across the world, not out of pity, but out of compassion. People wanted to help. Mark handed the Whittakers tens of thousands of dollars in cash and a van. He helped give them a lifeline. He did not supervise the money. He did not manage it. He wasn't their financial guardian. He provided access, resources, and exposure, but not management. He believed that releasing the story to the world would inspire support, and it did, but support without structure is unpredictable. Generosity without guidance becomes chaos. And in that chaos, a space opened for other creators. Content creators arrived afterward like bees drawn to honey. Suddenly, there was credit to claim, money to be made, and influence to acquire. People filmed, commented, monetized, defended, attacked, and investigated each other. Some creators argued they were helping. Others demanded transparency, demanded accountability, and demanded to know where the money went. But the Whittakers did not demand this. The family was left only to react to the consequences. When the Daily Mail article claimed that content creators interfered to the point the government stepped in, many readers saw it as confirmation. The Whittakers were removed from their home because of YouTube drama. Government officials, according to the article, shut down further interviews. Suddenly the videos stopped. The property became quiet, and creators online pointed fingers. Some blamed Mark. Others blamed later creators. Others blamed the media. Yet, none of them lived in the house where the consequences landed. The truth may simply be this: the state ignored the family for their whole lives and only acted when millions were watching. Not because they cared, but because they were embarrassed. The article focused heavily on the family's living conditions, describing cluttered kitchens, propane heaters, makeshift yards, and outbuildings. It described the sounds of grunts, single words, and limited speech abilities. But conditions like that do not appear overnight. These symptoms have existed for decades. And no reporter intervened then. No agency intervened then. No government funding was secured then. The family was not in danger until the public saw them. And once the world saw them, suddenly they were a liability. Critics argue the Daily Mail report twists the Whittakers into a spectacle again, while claiming concern. Supporters argue exposure was needed to incite change. Yet, the debate overlooks the only perspective that matters. The Whittakers did not ask for any of this. They did not seek followers. They did not ask for documentaries. They did not write headlines. But they did open their door to Mark, to cameras, and to the world. Whether they understood the consequence of that choice is difficult to know. When Betty waved her hand for visitors to come sit, she invited strangers into her world. When Ray barked and smiled at the camera, he unknowingly connected to millions of strangers who would react to him with everything from love to mockery. When Larry stood beside reporters and creators, he became a viral image. And yet none of them were prepared for what would come after. Mark's involvement brought donations without structure. Brian Cody promised to help but became entangled in money disputes. Eric Carroll arrived with ambition, claims, controversies, and contradictions. Patrick helped but walked away, leaving confusion behind. Bloggers, analysts, commentators, and reaction channels picked apart every detail. And all the while, Betty remained on that same porch, Larry remained by her side, and the three removed adults vanished into an unknown facility where no one outside their family knows where they are. The state may believe it acted in the family's best interest. Maybe it did. Maybe the Whittakers needed safer housing. Maybe they needed supervision. But the secrecy around their location and welfare leaves one unsettling question. Are they being protected, or are they being hidden? Protection means improvement. Hiding means control. The family members taken away cannot speak for themselves. They cannot call the media and explain their experience. They cannot clarify whether they want to be home. All we know is Betty misses them, and Larry says he waits for a phone call that never comes. Content creators are being blamed because they exposed the situation. Yet, without exposure, would anyone have intervened at all? Without cameras, would Ray still sit on that same porch? Would Lorraine still be sleeping in the same back room? Would Timmy still be struggling without resources? Would anyone in authority have even known the family existed? The world watched, judged, donated, criticized, laughed, admired, and reacted. And in the end, the government acted too, but only after being pushed into view. The Whittakers did not become a crisis until the world watched. They did not become at risk until the public demanded accountability. So who is at fault? The media for sensationalizing? Creators for monetizing? The government for ignoring? Or society for consuming? Maybe fault does not belong to one party. Maybe the tragedy is not who caused it, but who failed to care until there was something to gain. Speech balloon comment below. Do you believe the Whittakers were helped or exploited, and who should take responsibility now? Hey everyone, before we get into the next part, I've got something special to share with you. If you're all about making your home smarter, cozier, and just a little bit more you, then you've got to check this out. We've partnered with TrecBo.com, a place built for people who love clever solutions and everyday comfort. From wellness and skincare must-haves to smart home gadgets, heated gear, and lifestyle tech, TrecBo is packed with products that make life easier, warmer, and way more fun. I've personally picked some of my favorite finds, things that actually work, look great, and make your day smoother. Whether it's something to simplify your morning routine, help you unwind after a long day, or bring a little innovation into your home, you'll find it there. So before you scroll past, take a quick look at TrecBo.com. Trust me, it's full of discoveries waiting to make your everyday better. Alright, now let's get back to it, because after this video, you're definitely going to want to explore what TrecBo has in store for the Whittaker household community. The Daily Mail article left a wave of confusion, anger, sympathy, and curiosity. It painted the Whittaker home as a place of neglect that needed state intervention. It emphasized the shock value of their living conditions, the block walls, the propane stove, and the scattered items outside their property. But to understand what happened, one must look at more than a cluttered house or an uncomfortable headline. Poverty in rural America often looks like disrepair. Isolation looks like oddness. Lack of healthcare looks like confusion. What was described as chaos was, for the Whittakers, simply life. For decades, they lived without interference. There were no welfare visits. There were no inspections. There were no enforceable mental health services arriving at their doorstep. The system that now claims to protect them was absent for generations. Their story was not an emergency until millions of viewers made it go viral. The Daily Mail framed the removal of 3 Whittaker family members as a protective measure triggered by public attention. The article suggested that public scrutiny, and specifically social media creators, pushed the state to act. It highlighted adult protective services and government involvement, but it did not examine why intervention never occurred before. It is easy to act when everyone is watching. It is harder to justify doing nothing when the world is looking. Yet, intervention without clarity can produce another form of harm. Removing Lorraine, Ray, and Timmy while giving almost no information to the remaining family members creates fear, not safety. Betty and Larry do not know where their loved ones are, how they are doing, or when they can see them. The state can argue confidentiality, but secrecy doesn't erase suffering. It simply relocates it. Some argue content creators caused this chain reaction, but cause does not equal blame. Creators brought attention to a reality that had been ignored. The question is whether they did so responsibly. Many documented the family with sincerity, some with opportunism, and others with confusion. The public watched the story unfold like a drama rather than a humanitarian issue. And once viewers became emotionally invested, creators became voices, commentators, and eventually combatants. Mark Lyda's involvement began with storytelling. He asked questions, filmed interactions, and introduced viewers to a family many had never imagined existed in the modern day. He presented their life without a script. His films showed details that could not be ignored: the barking noises, the silence, the limited communication. The public felt compelled to react. But documentary eyes are not protective eyes. A camera lens records. It does not fix. It does not fund. It does not rehabilitate. It does not intervene. Money arrived without guidance. Donations were delivered without oversight. A van was gifted without ownership protections. The Whittakers received tools without instructions. The generosity itself was real, yet the aftermath lacked support structures. Good intentions do not guarantee good outcomes. After Mark, the dynamic shifted. New personalities entered the story, each interpreting the family differently. Some wanted to expose scammers. Some wanted justice. Some wanted credit. Others wanted influence. But the family, who did not ask for fame, became the subject of arguments that did not help them directly. Creators like Eric Carroll and Brian Cody brought further visibility. They also brought conflict. Accusations of theft, gaslighting, manipulations, and financial exploitation spread across live streams and comment threads. But none of these arguments helped Betty see her siblings. None secured medical supervision for Ray. None educated or assisted Timmy with communication needs. None explained where Lorraine was taken. The Daily Mail hinted that creators divided the family. But what divided the family was not cameras. It was structural neglect. The lack of support. The sudden involvement of protective services without clarity. The secrecy around treatment. The absence of family rights. Generational poverty does not turn into stability simply because it becomes viral. Viral attention can bring money, but money does not replace social services. Viewers sent donations but could not supply care. Creators produced videos but could not provide therapy. The state intervened but did not communicate. Each group acted, but not in collaboration. The result was fragmentation. When the Daily Mail published the detailed genealogy of the family, it revived the same sensationalism that always surrounded them. It spoke of cousins marrying cousins, grandparents who were siblings, and the physical and mental impairments that resulted. Yet, the article did not explore the larger truth. Isolation breeds desperation, and desperation creates circumstances that repeat. Inbreeding is not the story. The story is how society treats people who are different. For years, no one offered education, healthcare, or disability support. There were no programs for remote families with special needs. There were no therapists driving dirt roads to Odd, West Virginia. When they needed support, they received silence. When they became a spectacle, they received cameras. When the spectacle became too loud, they received state custody. Each step came too late, too little, or too chaotically. There is no clean narrative. The Whittakers are not villains. They are not heroes. They are not cautionary tales. They are individuals with unique challenges who needed support before anyone ever filmed them. Assigning blame to the Daily Mail is easy. Their article highlighted drama. Blaming Mark is simple. He started the story. Blaming Eric or Brian Cody is convenient. They continued the narrative. But blaming any one party simplifies something that was already complicated. Responsibility exists in layers. The media amplified without context. Creators responded without safeguarding. The state intervened without transparency. The public consumed without understanding. And the system failed long before any camera arrived. No one force caused this outcome. But one truth stands above the noise. The Whittakers themselves did not have the power to control any of it. Betty did not choose headlines. Ray did not choose virality. Lorraine did not choose a facility. Timmy did not choose strangers at his door. Larry did not choose camera debates. They simply lived, and the world barged in. After the removals, their home feels quieter. The porch where they once sat together is emptier. The confusion from not seeing loved ones lingers, but confusion is nothing new to this family. They lived in confusion before, but it was familiar confusion, daily routines, known faces, predictable days. Now their confusion is new, frightening, and caused by strangers claiming to help. Intervention without communication strips people of control. It tells them they were wrong, but does not explain how to be right. It tells them they need help, but does not show them what help looks like. That is the situation the Whittakers are in now. They can no longer speak for themselves in the public eye. They are restricted from interviews. Their story belongs to state records and confidentiality agreements. But their absence speaks louder than cameras ever did. The world looked at the Whittakers and reacted. The government looked at the world and responded. But who is looking at the Whittakers now? Their story is frozen, not by creators, not by newspapers, but by a system finally reacting after decades of silence. And yet, reaction alone is not protection. Change requires more than intervention. It requires involvement. Not from cameras. Not from reporters. Not from YouTubers fighting over money and motives. But from professionals who see beyond shock value. From social workers who communicate with families. From healthcare providers who diagnose rather than judge. From programs that support rather than remove. The Whittakers deserve solutions, not debates. They deserve resources, not secrecy. And they deserve respect, not curiosity. What comes next depends on whether people look at them as content, as case studies, or as humans. That choice will determine whether their viral fame becomes a lifeline or a tragedy that continues in silence. Speech balloon comment call. Share your thoughts respectfully. Should the Whittakers care prioritize family access or full state control? When discussing fault in the Whittaker family crisis, the conversation often shifts away from the individuals directly affected. Instead, the dialogue becomes a tug-of-war between media responsibility, creator accountability, and state intervention. But the answer is not found in headlines or comment sections. It lies in the everyday dynamics of the family itself and how outside forces altered a fragile balance that had existed for decades. The core issue was never internet exposure alone. It was the sudden collision between a private life built on unspoken rules and a public world obsessed with answers, explanations, and entertainment. The Whittakers were thrust into a space where strangers attempted to interpret, define, diagnose, and manage their reality without fully understanding it. Before cameras arrived, the Whittakers lived within a predictable structure. Betty took care of the household, cooked meals, organized needs, and supervised the routines of the family members with more severe impairments. Larry assisted with chores, transportation, errands, resource pickups, and handled many tasks requiring communication outside the home. Ray and Lorraine remained in their familiar environment, where communication was nonverbal but consistent. Timmy relied on repetitive comfort, routine tasks, and physical closeness to his mother. Their daily life had limitations, but familiarity protected them from confusion and overwhelming stress. The arrival of content creators disrupted that predictability. A camera lens changes behavior, not just for those filmed but for those surrounding them. Filming introduced incentives, attention, recognition, and eventually money. Decisions began to revolve around audience expectations. Viral interest generated donations. Donations led to more filming. More filming meant greater demand for access, more time spent recording, more opinions given by outsiders, more promises made on camera. The family became a commodity without understanding the transactional nature of content. Intent did not always equal exploitation. Not every creator sought profit at the family's expense. Some believed they were helping. Some believed they were documenting. Some simply followed a growing trend. But once money appeared, motivations blurred. Influence grew. Voices outside of West Virginia grew louder than those inside the house. Even when creators tried to advocate for the Whittakers, their presence still altered family dynamics. The Daily Mail amplified what creators started, but with a different motive. Their goal was exposure, readership, and sensational impact. The article introduced historical lineage details, family genealogy, and explicit references to inbreeding, framed as a shocking scientific discovery. Yet this information did not serve the welfare of the Whittakers. It served the curiosity of readers, reinforcing a decades-old stereotype of Appalachian poverty and rural isolation. The family became a living exhibit, a mixture of fascination and pity. Still, to blame only the media overlooks another piece of the puzzle: how the state responded to the attention. For decades, adult protective services and similar agencies had the legal ability to intervene if necessary. Poverty did not begin in 2020. Disability did not emerge because a documentary filmed it. The Whittakers lived in the same house, with the same impairments, the same lack of resources, and the same struggles for decades. But without public pressure, their case never triggered urgency. Social services often operate reactively, responding more quickly when public scrutiny threatens liability. The removals of Ray, Lorraine, and Timmy came after viral coverage intensified. Their removal came after content creators began fighting publicly. Their removal came after articles exposed legal trouble around BJ. Only then did officials step in with force. Not to offer resources, not to restructure care, but to separate. This type of intervention can be emotionally catastrophic. Neurodivergent and intellectually disabled adults often struggle with abrupt separation. Losing contact with familiar caregivers is not just stressful, it can be traumatic. Phone calls provide reassurance. Photos provide grounding. Contact maintains identity. When the state withholds all of that, individuals experience invisible suffering that is rarely documented in case reports. In the Whittaker's situation, silence was justified as confidentiality. But confidentiality without communication becomes a barrier, not protection. It does not preserve dignity. It isolates families from each other without explanation. At the same time, some argue that removal may have been necessary, not because of neglect from Betty or Larry, but because outside exposure introduced risk. When videos began filming frequently, strangers arrived at the property uninvited. Some came for curiosity. Some came for photos. Some came without understanding boundaries. Privacy was eroded. The family could not regulate who could enter or who was watching. The open-door nature of their home made them increasingly vulnerable. Content creators fueled this dynamic. Some encouraged public involvement. Some took pride in visiting frequently. Others claimed exclusive access. A community that once protected its own suddenly found itself exposed to unpredictable traffic. Supporters meant well, yet support without structure breeds chaos. Meanwhile, creators began accusing each other of exploitation, while still filming. The argument over who helped the family became a competition over ownership of their story. But no one can own the story of a family that did not ask to be told. The Whittakers were left with conflict swirling around them while having little control over how that conflict affected their lives. The question then becomes, how could intervention have happened responsibly? Real assistance would have required collaboration between creators, licensed professionals, and local support services. Donations could have been placed in monitored trust funds. Family consent could have been guided by advocates trained in disability law. Cameras could have paused during legal disputes. The Whittakers could have had representation instead of internet commentary. Instead, no structure emerged. Help came in pieces, not plans. For responsibility to exist, accountability must also exist. Not to punish, but to correct. Creators needed guidelines before filming disabled adults who cannot fully consent to long-term exposure. News outlets needed ethical limits regarding language that dehumanizes rural communities. The state needed protocols to protect families without isolating them. And viewers needed awareness that entertainment has consequences. Blame is not a productive direction. Accountability, however, can create progress. When assessing who caused harm, it is easier to look at the last event, the removal, rather than the chain of history behind it. The removal was a response. It was not the cause. The cause was a combination of historical neglect, sudden public attention, lack of professional oversight, and an absence of structured advocacy. The true fault lies not in a single moment, a single creator, a single article, or a single decision. It lies in the gaps where systems fail rural communities, where poverty becomes invisible until it becomes viral, where disability goes unsupported until it becomes dramatic, where protection becomes secrecy instead of transparency. The Whittakers survive on resilience. That resilience was built before cameras. It will persist after headlines fade. But resilience is not a replacement for assistance. The family deserves more than survival. They deserve services, representation, communication, and dignity. The public often speaks about the Whittakers with fascination, sympathy, or outrage. Rarely with practical solutions. Rarely with understanding of disability care. Rarely with knowledge about rural isolation. Their story is not about inbreeding. It is not about content wars. It is not about drama. It is about what happens when society discovers poverty too late and responds without preparation. For now, their future remains unclear. But whatever comes next must focus on one thing, not who benefits from their story, but how they benefit from the attention they did not ask for. Speech balloon comment call. Share your thoughts in a respectful way, focusing only on solutions that protect the family's dignity and rights. Public reaction to the Whittaker situation reveals how quickly people choose sides without understanding how intertwined those sides actually are. Viewers pick a villain: content creators, the Daily Mail, the state, family members, or even Betty herself. A narrative forms based on fragments of information, edited clips, or emotionally charged comments. But the truth is, no single entity created the crisis, and no single entity can resolve it. In looking at responsibility, it becomes essential to acknowledge that suffering continued because each group believed someone else held the solution. The Daily Mail assumed government intervention was already appropriate. Content creators assumed the family needed exposure and financial help. The audience assumed donations were enough. The state assumed removal was the most immediate answer. And through all of these assumptions, the people most impacted, the Whittakers, had the least decision-making power. The Daily Mail's responsibility. The Daily Mail article did not invent the Whittaker situation, but it magnified it through a specific lens: shock journalism. By prioritizing sensational language, especially around inbreeding, genetics, and fan fascination, the article shaped public opinion. It framed the family less as people and more as subjects in a strange American tragedy. This framing pushed the Whittakers into a category where their conditions became a spectacle rather than a call for structured support. Their struggles were not explored as symptoms of generational poverty, systemic neglect, or isolation. Instead, the narrative focused on America's most inbred family. This headline not only dehumanized them but also overshadowed the role of generational hardship and lack of access to resources. The article exposed real problems: the living conditions, the presence of individuals with drug-related charges, and the vulnerability of disabled adults. But it failed to differentiate between exploitative behavior, mismanagement of external assistance, and simple poverty. By highlighting dysfunction without discussing solutions, the article became a catalyst for emotional reaction, not informed empathy. Yet even if the tone was questionable, some exposure was necessary. Without that coverage, the state may never have stepped in at all. However, stepping in does not equal providing support, and this gap reveals a deeper failure. Content creators' responsibility. Creators did not create the Whittaker struggles, but they accelerated them. The moment cameras arrived, the family's privacy evaporated. Their porch, once a local meeting spot, became a broadcast stage. Their laughter, confusion, expressions, and behaviors were uploaded with millions watching. What used to be ordinary daily activity became interpreted through viral context. Small moments became drama. Poverty became content. Disability became clicks. Creators often justify involvement through two claims: they helped financially, and they gave the family a platform. Both can be true and still incomplete. Money given without professional oversight or structured management does not solve poverty. Platforms shared with disabled individuals, especially those who cannot fully consent, require legal guidance. These pieces were missing. Without safeguards, creators unintentionally fed a cycle where exposure drove income, and income drove more exposure. When disagreements erupted between creators, the Whittakers were pulled into conflicts they could not understand, much less navigate. Suddenly the family's name was not just associated with poverty and inbreeding, but with financial scandals, withheld payments, accusations of exploitation, and broken contracts. Their identities became a legal and moral battleground. No professional advocate stood between them and those profiting off their image. They were left defenseless in a public arena, though they never auditioned for that stage. The state's responsibility. Many assume the state acted out of concern. Some insist authorities were waiting for the right moment to intervene. Others believe the state stepped in only because public scrutiny became too big to ignore. Regardless of motive, 3 individuals, Timmy, Lorraine, and Ray, were suddenly removed from their home. Removed does not mean rescued. Removed does not mean supported. Removed does not mean happier. Professional intervention without family communication destabilizes relationships. Separation without explanation inflicts emotional harm. When guardianship becomes secrecy, family becomes strangers. If the state believed the environment was unsafe, it should have equally believed family bonds were worth protecting. Instead, removals happened first. Communication came later, and the family was left to guess, hope, and wait. Adult Protective Services is meant to protect vulnerable individuals from exploitation. But if they only remove, without educating, without assisting, without supporting the caregivers who relied on structure, then protection becomes punishment for being poor, uneducated, isolated, and documented on camera. The audience's responsibility. Viewers play a role too. Online comments, rumors, assumptions, and emotional reactions influence the narrative, drive platforms, and add pressure to all sides. While many viewers act out of genuine concern, clicks feed algorithms that reward exploitation. Outrage drives more content. Sympathy encourages more coverage. Donations, though helpful, sometimes reinforce dependence rather than introducing professional guidance. When thousands of people care, but no one organizes care, confusion replaces help. Concern needs structure. Help needs coordination. Donations need management. If audiences want to help the Whittakers, that help must come through systems that protect their financial, emotional, and legal safety, not systems driven by views, shares, or reactions. How the crisis could have been prevented. The Whittakers' situation reveals the consequences of acting too fast without planning. Exposure without legal representation. Donations without financial management. Content creation without consent protocols. Intervention without communication or family partnership. Public interest without protective education. Viral empathy without professional advocacy. If the family had access to a disability advocate, a social worker specialized in rural resources, and legal protection before appearing online, their story might have unfolded differently. They might have received upgrades to their home instead of removals. They might have gotten medical care, psychiatric evaluations, and behavioral therapy without losing family ties. They might have kept agency over their identity instead of becoming public property. What justice should look like now? Justice for the Whittakers is not about punishment. It is about rebuilding stability and dignity. Justice means clear communication between the state and the family, supervised visitation for Betty, Larry, and the removed relatives, financial advocacy for donated money, therapeutic support for trauma caused by sudden separation, ethical guidelines for creators who film neurodivergent adults, rural resource assistance for long-term safety. Justice does not mean removing cameras entirely, it means filming responsibly, with transparency, consent monitoring, and accountability. It does not mean banning media coverage. It means requiring ethical standards for stories involving vulnerable disabled individuals, where responsibility truly lies. Fault is shared, not owned by one name. But responsibility to fix the damage is shared too. The Whittakers did not ask for fame, money, protection, scandal, or exposure. They asked, in their own ways, for normalcy. They asked to stay together. They asked to live in peace. And peace can only be restored if every group involved stops distancing themselves from accountability. The Daily Mail made their story international. Creators brought them income but also controversy. The state acted but did not clearly communicate. The public watched without understanding the consequences of watching. Now, for the first time, all of these groups have something they never had before: awareness. Awareness can lead to responsibility. Responsibility can lead to solutions. And the family deserves solutions. Not sympathy without action. Not exposure without consent. Not intervention without communication. They deserve dignity. Because at the end of every headline, video, donation, and legal document, there are human beings who never asked to be defined by the world, only to be respected by it. Speech balloon comment call. Share your perspective only if your comment focuses on dignity, responsibility, and respectful solutions for the family, not blame or drama. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.